Sound speeds, and welcome to Stories from Set, where we talk to real sound pros and ask them to tell us real stories from set. This week we have a veteran of over 30 years in the sound world, Robert Maxfield, and he's going to tell us a wonderful story about his experiences on National Treasure 2. Without further delay, Max, thanks for joining us, and why don't you go ahead and tell us your story?
A footnote is that I didn't boom the whole show. I only boomed the last week of the show. National Treasure 2. Phil Palmer, you know who Phil Palmer is. He called me and said, "Hey, do you want to come do this?" And the main sound mixer was Peter Devlin, and Michael Petrowski was the boom operator. And Michael was my boom operator back in the late 90s when I was mixing over in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I trained Michael Petrowski, and then he went on to become one of the best boom operators in the business. And it was the two of them and Phil that contacted me and said, "Hey, will you guys come do this?" Well, as per normal, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I was happy to be working, and I just got a week's worth of work on National Treasure 2, a highly notable film. So I showed up for work that morning on the back lot of Universal Studios at the lake, and it's the same lake where they shot Jaws many, many years earlier. And 7 o'clock in the morning, they call a rehearsal. I go down for the rehearsal, and going down meant walking down these steps into this Mayan temple that they had built out of wood and then sealed on the outside with rubber and various other things to keep it watertight. And the tomb was being hung above the water by a 300-foot crane high up in the air. And there was all kinds of other pumps and water hoses and all of that, that were involved. But at this point, I still didn't really know anything except that there was going to be water in the scene. So I walk into the tomb and go down the steps, and the tomb, it turns out, is already sunk in about 3 feet of water. So now I've shown up with normal shorts on. It's the middle of the summer. Fortunately, it was really hot. It was probably 95 degrees in Southern California. And I did have shorts. So I pulled off my shoes and I walked in up to just past my knees. And I watched them rehearse the scene. And it had Nicolas Cage, and it had all of them in it. Helen Mirren and what was his name? Ed, I want to say Ed White, the sound mixer. But Ed, what the heck was his name? And John Voight was there. They were all in the room to do this rehearsal.
Oh, you picked a great day to start the show.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on here? I had no idea this is what we were doing. So we did the rehearsal, went back up, told Phil what was going on, and all of a sudden we're having to scramble going, how are we going to do this? Well, now 3 feet of water isn't that big a deal, but they're getting in the water, and they are going to be deluged with water because those pumps that I saw outside are going to be pumping hundreds, if not thousands of gallons of water into that room as we're shooting the scene. But the real catch was that as the week rolled on, we focused on this one scene the entire week. As the week went on, they gradually lowered the Mayan tomb or temple into this lake, the back lot of Universal Studios. So by the end of the week, the water was up to my chin, and I was the only person on the entire crew that was above water to shoot the show. Everybody else was like 6 feet 2 and under, and the grips and electricians were swimming. They got goggles and snorkels, and they're swimming to go down and set their C-stands and run their cables and set the lights. And we ended up having to put like my IFB device on top, and I taped it onto my headsets, and then my transmitter, which was then wirelessly sent to Phil outside. Right. That was all up here. That was in a plastic bag. I have photos, and then my headsets were they had to be put on really tight so they would stay there, and so I would go down and boom. Well, then we got to where we were having RF problems even with that as the week rolled on, because the water was coming up. When they would pump water in, I mean, there was water coming in from all directions. If you've seen the movie and you've seen,
oh yeah, it's a big scene.
Yeah, that's where it all took place, and louder than heck. And as you know, with waterproof transmitters, they don't get any water in them, but they don't transmit when they're underwater. So we couldn't,
not more than a couple of inches.
Yeah, we couldn't use them. So I had to boom everything. And if you watch the movie, it's all boomed. And they, as far as I know, they used all of that sound.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So I was in there booming away. And fortunately, their voices were loud because it was so noisy. There was so much water flowing.
And I'm sure they saw every bit of it, so they could use every bit of it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we spent a whole week, so there was lots of coverage. So at some point,
awesome.
Yeah, at some point or another, I was able to get the microphone right there in their face and get all the dialogue. Now, the negative part, the sad news to the story, is the very last day, very last scene. In fact, it was a wrap. It was a wrap on the movie at that point. And going back, I should say that RF, even on my headset, was not working after a while. We were having problems. So we went to a hardwired cable, which we taped off plastic and the whole bit around the connector. So we had no problem there. We ran that up to Phil, and then I would hook it onto my belt so that if there were any snags or whatever, it wouldn't be ripped off of my body. But we also, I would be out in the middle of this water, and I couldn't hold this boom pole and the mic above my head for these long periods of time. So we developed, I think we called it the canoe. And we took a boogie board, and we took a big plastic crate, like from Target or wherever, and we taped it to the boogie board. And so it floated in the temple. So
and gave you a place to put your elbows.
Yes. We put holders. We put number 2 grip clips on each end. And so those became the holders for the boom. And then I put my headsets inside the plastic case. Worked great. We implemented that on the second day of the show, and then that worked for us till the end of the week. Well, unfortunately, cut print, that's the movie. Thank you very much. And all kinds of people started coming in to grab their equipment and yank it out of there. And someone snagged the XLR cable and pulled the canoe over. And we lost not one, but we lost 2 microphones, my headsets, and some other stuff. So
it survived all the way until wrap.
Yeah, it was about, I think it was like $3,700 in equipment that went down the drain.
Wow.
So to speak.
Literally.
Yeah. So that's a moment I'll never forget.
That's such an awesome story, dude.
Yeah.
And that you just gave me an out of the edit also. Dude, that is awesome.
Yeah. Good.
That's actually very brilliant, having a boogie board, because I know exactly what you're talking about and how punishing that is.
It was a great idea. It needed a larger base. It needed a more stable, larger base, and it would have been fine. But the boogie board wasn't good for small waves.
Yeah.
Great for floating, but not so. I don't know. I would do something. I'd probably get a larger piece of styrofoam.
Wow.
Do something to stabilize it better. You have to. I mean, how often do you work in a situation like that? Where
very seldomly.
You're way out in the water, and anyway.
And a lot of the times, like if you had more time to prep or something, or the whole scene was like that Unbroken movie, and most of it took place in the water, you would have had plenty of time to do something like that.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I do water scenes, I try to get something like a canoe or something like that. But I guess if you just stepped into it and you were inside of a temple, there's not a whole lot you could have done except what you did.
Yeah, there's not enough space. And the camera, spins around. This was not an open water scene. It was not like a pool where you can just walk to the edge. There was one stairwell, one narrow stairwell that went up and down, and it wasn't big enough, to have, a boat, to stuff sitting around, because you had to hide it. So there was fortunately like this, if you watch the movie, there was this big turnstile where they eventually locked off the water. It raised and lowered a door, and I was able to kind of hide the canoe behind that.
That is really an awesome story.
Yeah, but this canoe was only 3 feet long.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story with us, Max. And everyone, tune in with us next week for another story from set. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.